When Sandy Hook happened, a mass shooting where 26 children died, that was the end of the gun debate in America. When we decided that we could stomach over 20 kids being shot and killed in first grade in their classrooms, that was the end of the gun debate. So are we going to have a gun debate? No, we're not going to have a gun debate about this tragedy. We're not going to.
Meet Palle Bo, a digital nomad from Denmark on an epic journey around the world. At the age of 50, he made a bold decision. He sold everything, his house, his car, his furniture, and set out with a quest to visit every single country in the world, documenting everything along the way. This is the Radio Vagabond podcast.
It's day 2 of my visit to Washington D.C. and yesterday I was in the museum with an N, the museum that talks about press and press freedom, and there was a thing that I missed yesterday because I had to meet Rob, and that was the Pulitzer Prize exhibition. And it's one of those museums that you have to pay for to get in. But then you get a 2-day pass, and I was glad I got that because I was able to go back and see this exhibition, and it was absolutely, in my opinion, the highlight of the museum, and I would say almost the highlight of my visit to DC so far. You have Pulitzer Prize award-winning photographs from the 40s up to now, and you have videos you're able to scroll through and hear the photographers tell the stories about how they took the picture. If you're in Washington, D.C., you must promise me that you will go and see that exhibition. It's absolutely amazing, and a lot of pictures can really bring a tear to your eye. The tour guide Rob from TriphacksDC.com recommended me to visit the Capitol.
So I highly recommend a Capitol tour.
And so I did. This is me just after I've been there. It's one of those things that are free, and it takes about an hour. You just go to the visitor center and you start inside a movie theater where they show you a film about the Capitol, how it was built, how it was burned down in, I think it was 1812 when the British attacked. So was the White House, in fact. One of the things I didn't know about Washington D.C. and how it was rebuilt again. And then you go for a tour in certain parts of the Capitol, and we got to go underneath the dome, being able to look at that beautiful, iconic room. And you can say, I've been inside that building.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where a lot of cities, there's the one place you really want to go, and sometimes it's just like in New York City, you got to go to Times Square. I personally don't think there's anything special about it, but I think the capital of the United States, you got
to be able to say I've been there. Yeah. Right now it's 20 minutes to 1, and I'm meeting one of the many lobbyists that work here in Washington D.C. in 20 minutes. So I'm walking there right now. But before I meet the lobbyist, his name is Ian Goldstein, we're going back to Rob that I met the day before. We're walking around in the National Mall. This is Sunday afternoon, and there's some kind of event going on in the background.
So what I can gather is that this is an event called the Co-op Festival, and it's basically about businesses which are cooperatives. So he's talking about a credit union right now, which is basically a cooperative bank. When I rode my bike past before, they were talking about a coffee company where the farmers are the owners of the company. So
that's it. So if you need help managing your money, a credit union is a great place to go to get information. And Dawn, who's in charge of HR, you know, if you work with a company, you love the HR department.
Commercial break.
Dawn, thank you very much on behalf of the
yeah,
Mike, back to you on the stage.
I have a really hard time. I've tried to make a few videos outdoors, and I always have a hard time because I can't get the sound right. Because there's always noise like this, the background. And
It started early in the morning. When I got here at 8 o'clock, it was quiet and very nice.
Yeah, when I started my tour today at 9 o'clock, it was very quiet. But, you know, people wake up and they go to church and eat brunch, and then they come down here to the National Mall for the day.
Let's just touch a little bit upon this fact that we're not in a U.S. state. We're in the District of Columbia.
Sure.
What's the story behind that?
So when Washington, D.C. was selected to be the capital of the United States, they made a decision that the capital would be in what they call a federal district, and that Congress would have control over the local laws in that place. And so the original District of Columbia was 100 square miles. It was a perfect diamond around the city. Mm-hmm. And then part of that was formerly in Virginia, they actually sort of chopped off and gave back to Virginia. And so now the District of Columbia is 69 square miles, sort of oddly shaped, and that is the federal district. Now there's a lot of controversy around this because folks who live in the District of Columbia don't have any member of Congress representing them. And perhaps more importantly, even though they have a city council and a mayor who can make laws.
They do have a city council, so that's not the Congress. For instance, if you want to build a building, you contact the mayor's office.
Right, so if you have a local concern, like your trash isn't being picked up, or you want to add a new bus route in your neighborhood, you would contact your city council member. And they are a legislative branch. They can pass laws just like any other city council or state legislature. And the mayor can sign it or she can veto it, just like anywhere else. But the big difference is that in the District of Columbia, the Congress can still, at the end of the day, have a final say over that law.
Oh.
And no other city in the United States is like that.
That's kind of special.
Right, and no European city is like this either. So it's actually quite a surprise when a lot of folks come over and learn that we have a system like this.
So it is in fact almost like the 51st state, but then again not.
Well, it's definitely not a state. There is a movement that's called the 51st State Movement. A lot of folks here would really like this to become the 51st state. And the sticking point is that the Constitution of the United States actually says that there will be a federal district that is controlled by Congress. And so the idea for the 51st state is that you would take a map of the city and you would carve out the area where we're standing right now, the National Mall, draw a line around the Capitol, up towards the White House over there, and then effectively there would be no population in this new federal district except for the president and first family. And the other 680,000 people in the District of Columbia would be the residents of this new state.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah. I meet Ian, the lobbyist, in a park not far from the mall. Just before I meet him, I'm back at the Washington Monument, between the Capitol building and Lincoln Memorial. In a big circle around the monument, there are flagpoles. I didn't count them, but my guess is that there are 50 flagpoles, one for each state in the US. What's special about this day is that every flag is on half-staff. That's because this is the day after the horrific mass shooting in Las Vegas, where a man started shooting into a crowd at a concert with 23 semi- and fully automatic weapons from the 32nd floor of a high-rise not that far away. He just fired into the crowd and killed 58 people and wounded more than 800. He fired more than 1,000 bullets, and it's to date the deadliest mass shooting by any one person ever in the US. And that's saying a lot, because this is definitely not the first mass shooting in the US. Ian, that I'm meeting, is a lobbyist, and even though he's not working with the gun laws, he's close to where decisions are being taken, and you can hear his take on what's gonna happen now after the massacre in Las Vegas. That's coming up. But before that, let me remind you that this episode is brought to you in part by Hotels25.com. It's a website that helps you find the best prices on hotel rooms around the world. The exact same room can cost something different on different sites. So what Hotels25.com does is it searches a lot of the biggest search sites in one simple search. That gives you the best price. Hotels25.com. You should try it out. It actually works. Ian is a lobbyist. Well, that is the easy title. Wait till you hear his official title.
My name's Ian Goldstein. I am a government affairs specialist at the National Association of County and City Health Officials. So, government affairs specialist.
Can you say that after a few drinks?
Sure, I can, but I use the acronym NACHO.
Okay.
So we've got a schizophrenic in the background. He's going to be yelling throughout this interview, just an FYI.
Yeah, that's a part of DC.
That's
right?
a part of DC, yeah, absolutely.
Give me that title again.
Government affairs specialist, which is a fancy term for lobbyist. Yeah.
And you're a lot of lobbyists here.
There are a lot of lobbyists, but the difference is, and I give several presentations about this. My job is considered a lobbyist in some ways, but I'm not a registered lobbyist because a lot of what I do is education and advocacy. So there are basically like three little bubbles, kind of think of like a Venn diagram, where you have lobbying, or let's start with educating. You have educating, right? So like we have subject matter experts in the field of public health, which is what I do, public health, that are educating lawmakers about particular issues. Because let's face it, lawmakers are just average schmoes that get into Congress, and they don't know what public health is, and they can't
know everything.
Right, they can't know everything. They might be businessmen, they're experts in business.
And you know what, Ian?
Yeah.
Healthcare is complicated.
Nobody knew. But it is. So yeah, it's very complicated, and so the realm of public health, a lot of it's educating. So,
but when you say educating, aren't you educating to make them see it from a certain point of view?
No. We're laying out facts, like straight up facts. Sometimes the facts themselves are biased, but that's just what it is. When we talk about climate change, it's a fact. It's science. 99.9% of scientists agree that this is what the facts are. So when we talk about climate change, we talk about asthma, and we talk about those sort of consequences of climate change. That's not just natural disasters, but also your health, right? So we present those educated facts that are not biased. We deliver that message. Now, then there's an advocacy part of that, which is a step down from education, where advocacy is saying, we need support for public health. We need support for climate change to, support scientists at the CDC and what they're doing. That's advocacy, like talking about a particular issue and advocating for it, right? Mm-hmm. Then there's lobbying, which is me going to a lawmaker saying, we want you to vote X, Y, and Z on this bill. We want you to vote yes for blah, blah, blah. We want you to vote no for blah, blah, blah. That is lobbying. So a lot of people don't know
and then you pay them a lot of money to do so.
Well, we don't pay them a lot of money. Special interests pay them a lot of money, and that's why.
They really do?
Oh yeah.
I thought that was illegal.
Campaign contributions. Now, we don't contribute to people's campaigns, but we are not special interests in that our special interests are the American people, not a particular group. So let's talk about what does that mean. Let's take the NRA, because today we had the horrific tragedy in Vegas, and it's on everybody's mind today, and I think it's a pretty heavy day today. Now, what's going to happen, right? So immediately you're going to see the following: thoughts and prayers from every GOP lawmaker. You are going to see the Dems cry, when are we going to have some meaningful gun legislation? And then you're going to have a bunch of hacks saying, now is not the time to politicize this issue. just like we had with the hurricanes, where they say climate change, now is not the time to discuss climate change while we're in the middle of a natural disaster. So you're going to have that, right? So then what happens next,
so
right?
That's sort of a natural thing that happens every time something major.
That is America
those
in
three
a nutshell.
things.
Those three things will happen in Washington, D.C., where we scream about gun legislation, then GOP lawmakers say, they're good guy with a gun versus bad guy with a gun, and like all this other crap that they spew about that we need to protect the Second Amendment. So what's going to happen? I'm sure some lawmakers are going to propose legislation that curbs some sort of issue, right? And okay, so when it comes to like healthcare debate, right? They were threatening to take away people's health insurance. The phone's lit up in the Senate, right? But that takes a lot. That takes myself. That takes every other public health organization, every doctor organization, every medical association saying, call your congressman, tell them to vote no on this terrible bill. Well, the NRA is going to tell their advocates, and they have many of them, and these people are rabid. They will light up those phones to those GOP lawmakers and say, do not vote to curb gun legislation, no on this gun legislation, no. And that is lobbying in a nutshell when it comes to gun control in this country. When Sandy Hook happened, Sandy Hook is a mass shooting where 26 children died. They were first graders.
When was that?
It was in 2012. Mm-hmm. That was the end of the gun debate in America. When we decided as a whole that we could stomach over 20 kids being shot and killed in first grade in their classrooms, that was the end of the gun debate. So are we going to have a gun debate? No, we're not going to have a gun debate about this tragedy. We're not going to.
You don't think it's ever going to happen?
No.
Is that partly because the NRA, the National Rifle Association, is so strong when it comes
100% the reason. Yes. They are very strong. And it's not about common sense regulation anymore. This is about people believe that they're, President Obama was the number one gun salesman in the history of this country without actually selling anything. You know what I mean? But every time there was a mass shooting, and today, look at gun stocks. They went up today, because people are going to buy more guns because they're afraid that they're going to take their guns away.
And it's not solely a blue and red debate. Some Democrats are also pro the gun law.
I am pro Second Amendment, but I think that semi-automatic and automatic weapons should not be legal. We're talking about a constitutional amendment that was written when there was one bullet in a gun. One. Yeah. So if we want to take it to that, you know what I mean? Like, there need, I don't believe that people should have military-style assault weapons. I just don't think that. But do I understand that rural America has a different take on guns versus urban America? Yes, my wife is from Arkansas. Like, I understand that guns are tools, and I understand what they're used for in rural America and not what they're used for in Baltimore or Washington, D.C. It's completely different. It's totally different issues. But I don't think that anybody needs an automatic weapon or a machine gun, which is what this guy used. And there's nothing to curb that. There's no good guy with a gun that's going to stop this man from killing 58 people and wounding 500. There's no good guy with a gun there.
No.
So,
but don't you think not even that is going to be on the table at some point?
Not until this country overwhelmingly decides that people shouldn't have automatic weapons, or at least mentally ill people shouldn't have automatic weapons.
You are listening to the Radio Vagabond podcast. If you like what you hear, please leave a review in iTunes. If you're listening on an iPhone, you can actually do it right there within your podcast app.
So I recommend seeing the monuments and memorials at night. And the reason for that is twofold. One is that they actually just look fantastic at night, all lit up. And it gets dark pretty early nowadays. So at this time of year, you could probably see it at 7 o'clock. It's fairly dark. But also because the museums close at 5 o'clock. So if you want to see the museums, you got to go between now and 5. The monuments are open 24 hours, so you can see them anytime. So you should really try to see them at a time when you're not competing with something else that you want to do.
And I can take anything you can throw at me, and nothing can get me down. Life is looking so bright, the sun is up again. I'm feeling like I could fly. No clouds in my way.
The White House is over here, and the White House Visitor Center is kind of like a museum if you want to learn a little bit about the history of the White House.
Oh, you can actually go into the Visitor Center.
Yeah, so the Visitor Center is not inside the White House. It's outside. It's on 15th Street over here, and it's kind of just like a little museum. So
yeah. I read a little bit about how to get a tour of the White House. It's if you're an American citizen, you contact your local governor office. But if you're a foreigner like me, it's a little bit more tricky. But I found some links on the internet, but I had to be applying 3 months in advance. So
at least 3 weeks in advance. If you're an international visitor, you have to arrange it through your country's embassy here in Washington, D.C. And from what I've been told from people over the years, some embassies are very helpful and others are a little bit less helpful. So depending on what country you're coming from, you may have better luck than others. Yeah. Generally speaking, the White House tour is only a tour of the East Wing. So the White House is split into two sides.
You don't get into the Oval Office?
No, so the East Wing is where most public visitors are received, and that's where the tour of the White House is. And then the West Wing, which is, of course, what everybody knows from Hollywood TV, is where the Oval Office and the Situation Room and all the, important rooms are located. And
interesting stuff.
Unless you know somebody who works in there, you're not going to be able to see that stuff.
I know a guy called Donald. Could I knock on the door and said, "Can Donald play?"
Well, in the old days, there wasn't a White House fence. You actually would have been able to walk up and knock on the door of the White House. Yeah. The extreme security at the White House is a fairly recent phenomenon in the span of U.S. history.
I guess it makes sense to have a fence there. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about how it works to be a lobbyist. Is it the key thing to know some people, to have a huge network, or is it about your capabilities to talk, or how does it work?
I would say
specifically.
Sure, that's a great question. That depends on our organization's integrity and our how well we are trusted by those in public health and by Congress. So we are trusted messengers. We're subject matter experts in the field of public health. So when I call them and convey a message, they do take our meeting, they do listen, because we are subject matter experts. So a lot of that is a lot of it's education and relationship building. That's really what it is. So let me give you for instance, what happened last week, because somebody hit me up last week. So before Hurricane Irma, Senator Bill Nelson's office called me and said, what do we need to do? Like, are we fully prepared here? Like, what can you tell us about what's going on the ground?
So the senators call you as well?
Well, their staff, not them personally. They'll call us because. So my association, NACHO, we represent the 3,000 local health departments around the country. So there are 3,000 local health departments in this country. Think of us as a hub where we can provide resources to different local health departments. So the local health departments in all of Florida were dealing with this hurricane. We send our subject matter experts, we send them resources, basically, like, here's what you need to do, like, here's Operation Command Center material, and here's this, and toolkits, and how to get word out to residents on how to shelter in place, and any type of work that a health department does, we are providing resources to them. So we tackle I guess you could call them 4 areas of public health, which is community health, which would be community health assessments. We can, in the United States, tell your health outcome based on your zip code, right? Like how healthy are you? How healthy is your neighborhood? What's the life expectancy of your neighborhood? And you can tell a lot by somebody's zip code in this country. So that's community health. Then you have environmental health, which would be climate change. It's also the EPA, regulating chemicals. It can be a number of things. Then you have public health preparedness, which is what we dealt with the hurricane, which is also environmental health, but it's public health preparedness. And even with the shooting last night, somebody actually on Twitter said, wow, how did a Las Vegas hospital deal with 500 people coming to the emergency room last night? Well, that's hospital system preparedness, and we pay $255 million a year the federal government pays to the CDC to train hospitals how to deal with mass casualty events. So they're fully prepared to take 500 patients after a mass shooting event, and they take them to probably 5 area hospitals where each gets 100 patients, and that's how they do it. People don't know that that's how that works, but the thing is that when public health is doing its job, you don't hear anything. All's quiet, right? Because if they don't do their job, that's when you hear about it. And so this has literally happened in Senate meetings, in House meetings where I've gone in, and I use this quote a lot on my podcast. I've used it in different lectures. But during the Zika crisis, we needed $1.9 billion, and the federal government did not want to give us $1.9 billion to deal with microcephaly in babies. It was horrifying, and it was terrible. The senator staffer said to me, well, we gave you the $5.8 billion for Ebola. Where was the Ebola? And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? So in this country, people have to get things. We have to respond. And so we have this response instead of preventive approach to health, wherein 50 babies have to get microcephaly, which will cost $500 million to deal with over their lifetime before we're going to give you $1 billion for Zika. Do you know what I'm saying? So you need to see the tragedy first, and then we will respond to such tragedy. So when they didn't see anybody get Ebola in this country, it was a waste of money because nobody got Ebola. Well, they didn't get Ebola because that money was spent wisely, and so that's how that works. Yeah.
You have a lot of hacks on your YouTube channel. Can you share some of the best ones? I remember you saying something about how to avoid big crowds.
Yeah. So when you're visiting the museums, there are two sets of doors at most of the Smithsonian museums. One that face the National Mall, the big grassy park, and another that face either Constitution or Independence Avenues on the other side. And tour buses unload on the National Mall side. A tour bus can have 50 or more people in it, all trying to go to the museum at once. And unfortunately, our museums are very heavy on security. So that means it's just like at the airport, you've got to empty your pockets, you've got to put all your stuff through the metal detector, and then you've got to go in and be wanted if you set it off. This can be a problem if you're behind a big group, if it's kids, for example, who don't really know what they're doing, they're not experienced with that. It can take a really long time. So a lot of times you can just swing around to the other side of the museum and there won't be anybody waiting in line and you can just go right in.
And you mentioned something about going in the opposite direction than the group?
Oh, sure. So if you want to visit a museum first thing in the morning, museums open at 10 a.m. And people generally, and this is true at a museum, at an amusement park, anywhere really, the first thing they do is the thing that's closest to the door. So when you go into a museum, go to the top floor or go to the bottom floor or whatever's farthest away from the door and just start there, because likely you'll have the place more or less to yourself for a little while until people start filtering through the museum and getting to those exhibits.
Yeah, that's a good hack.
You can't really hear it, but I'm in a room with a lot of people. Everybody are quiet. I'm at the Holocaust Museum, one of the many museums close to the National Mall here in Washington D.C. And the first thing that we see when we step out of the elevators on the 4th floor is a giant poster of a picture from one of the concentration camps. It's a picture that depicts what American troops, when they liberated the Ohrdruf concentration camp in central Germany in April 1945. It's a mass grave of a lot of dead people being burned. It's truly, truly disturbing. Right next to it, there's a TV screen showing some footage from Dachau concentration camp. Again, very disturbing.
On TV, it actually looks like a lot of things on the National Mall are pretty close to each other. You know, you see a view from behind the Lincoln Memorial and you see the Washington Monument and the Capitol right there. And those are actually pretty far apart. There's a few mile walk between the steps of Lincoln and the Capitol Dome. So 2 ways to get around if you don't want to walk. You can grab a Capitol Bike Share bike, It's very simple to use. I have a...
How does it work?
So basically, you can either pay to get a 1-day pass or a 3-day pass, or just pay for a single trip. A single trip costs $2. You swipe your credit card, it'll give you a code.
At the machine where the bikes are?
At the machine, yeah. They also have an app now, which I highly recommend using because it works fantastically, and you don't have to stand in line behind a bunch of people who are swiping their credit card and signing up for the bike share at the machine. And then you get a 30-minute ride for no additional cost, and if you want to keep the bike for longer, you can pay a little extra and keep it for longer. But if you want to get around a little bit more quickly, or you're just tired from walking, that can be a good way to get around. The other thing is we have the Circulator is a public bus, big red bus. There's one right over there if you're curious that's about to come by. And it has a big loop around the National Mall. Costs $1 to ride. Oh. And so if you really don't want to use your legs at all, you can hop on there, and that'll take you from the Capitol to the Lincoln Memorial and all around the museums and the monuments. You're going to go to the White House?
The White House, and then I'll do the monuments tonight.
Yeah.
That's all we have time for in this episode, but I've got more to share with you from Washington, D.C. Next Monday, I'll continue my tour around DC with Rob, the tour guide. He's from TriphacksDC.com. And then I'll talk some more to Ian, the lobbyist. And then I'll have a chat with a street musician that used to be homeless, and he has a lot of exciting stuff to share. On Friday, you'll get one of those bonus episodes with interviews with interesting people, and this guy is called Travis Sherry. He's got the podcast Extra Pack of Peanuts and a project with a mutual friend, Jason Moore, that they call Location Indie. My name is Pelle Bo. See ya.